The Rebel Capitalist Show.
So two things I want to go over just and look through the lens or look at it through the lens of demographics in these cycles. And then we'll let you go. I really appreciate your time. The first thing is I remember seeing one of your animations on YouTube, and it talked about Gen Z. I believe that was the group they were started to come around in the early 2000s, and how they were kind of overly coddled, for lack of a better word, and how that could lead today to have a large push in our society to value safety, maybe a lot more than they value freedom. And that was number one. And then number two, I am just astonished at the, let's just call them bubbles that we see, or the hysteria, the mania that we see in things like NFTs or cryptocurrencies. I remember I did a story yesterday on Shibu or Shibi Uni or Una or whatever that joke of a joke cryptocurrency is now. It got to over a $50 billion market cap. And I'm like, how can this possibly be happening? And maybe it has to do with these cycles. What do you think about those two things?
I think it's going to be a fairly short-lived cycle. I think that is a case of this boom unleashed by policy, right? Enormous deficits and enormous monetary easing, giving rise to this valuation.
Okay, so you think that's more fiscal and monetary policy as opposed to
I mean, in other
demographics?
Words, it's the whip end of that, right? Valuations are going crazy. You see this valuation expansion everywhere in all assets, right? And the riskier the asset, the bigger the growth. Well, you get into something like, the Dogecoin and stuff. I mean, you're getting out there, and that stuff is just going crazy.
And Shibu Inu is a joke of Dogecoin, by the way, if you didn't know that.
There you go. You got a joke on a joke. But when valuations start compressing, when it goes the other way, it goes just as fast down. That's my take on it.
Okay.
And
then what about with Gen Z, valuing safety a little bit more because they were maybe
no question about that. And that's actually a fundamental generational trend. I usually call them Homelander generation instead of Gen Z. I mean, I hate the idea of just another letter, Yeah. But we think that this younger generation, we date them a little later than Pew Research does. I mean, we think that these are kids who were born only a few years before the GFC. Okay. So they're still in grade school today. They're maybe entering high school today. Millennials, we think, is going to be a generation about 22, 23 years long. There's always a tendency, by the way, of social commentators to cut the most recent generation short because they want to talk about something else. See, always have these PR firms saying, well, I saw this with Generation X. I've seen this with so many mini generations crop up, over the past 25 years. But the larger insight is correct. This generation is going to be sheltered. They're at home. One of the reasons I call them Homelander is not just because of the Department of Homeland Security, right, and all this new concern about protecting America, but also they're literally at home more than any other generation in American history. They are very protected. They're very rule bound, and they're very much interested in pleasing adults and getting along with older people. The idea of raging against the system or bucking authority is really not what they're about. As I think people who have, I have these kids at home, by the way. I know. So that's not what they're about. That's not what their culture is about. And I think that the absolute parallel to this generation is the silent generation, born in the late 1920s, 1930s, early 1940s. Who were children during the Great Depression and World War II. They were very well socialized, very rule abiding. They came of age just after the GI generation, when people started noticing them actually in the late 1940s, just after World War II. And the question was, these kids, what makes them different? Instead of wanting to, change the system, join the Communist Party, do huge things with American civic life, and organize unions, conquer half the world, like the GI generation. Their motto was, we don't want to change the system. We want to work within the system. Their first questions on job interviews is about pension plans. What about my 30-year handshake? And they dressed very conservatively. They were very cautious. There's a famous Time magazine essay written about them in 1951, calling them the silent generation, how they were seem middle-aged even as young adults, right? In other words, very much. And the reason that actually they got the name silent was during the McCarthy era, when older people were tearing each other's reputation for what they did during the 30s. Were you a communist? Were you not a communist? They kept their mouths shut because we had nothing on our records, right? They didn't want anything to get on their permanent record, right? That's how risk averse they were. And that really is, and interestingly, because we're such a gerontocracy today, we have such older people still in power. We actually have members of the silent generation at very high levels of authority, right? Nancy Pelosi being one, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden was born in 1942. He personally recalls World War II. How many people? By definition, a boomer just has no personal recollection of World War II. It's almost how you define a boomer, right? I mean, they were raised after it was over, So this is interesting, isn't it? And what do you think of Biden? He's sort of like the Mr. Rogers of politics. He's sort of, very easygoing. I think everyone can compromise. We can always bring everyone, low key, definitely believes in consensus and process. And that's been their, trademark throughout much of their lives. It's a fascinating generation, actually, because in many ways they foreshadowed some of the boomer trends because they got tired of a lot of that early conformity. Yeah. But I think later in their life, they've always represented a fairly risk-averse, process-oriented generation. And interestingly, in American leadership, they've had almost no participation. Think about this. Of that entire generation, Biden is the first member of that generation to be elected president. We completely leapfrogged them. We went from, George Herbert Walker Bush
to Obama,
who was a World War II veteran, to Bill Clinton, who was born after World War II. And we completely leapfrogged them, and we've never gone back. Joe Biden was their last possible candidate, and he won. And that will be the little asterisk on the silent, having no president. That will be their one president, right? So it's interesting. These are what we call politically recessive generations. By the way, another politically recessive generation is sort of the opposite end of the saculum, and that's Generation X. I mean, Generation X is politically very slow to appear politically. And the reason is because none of them trust the system. None of them really want to have any, the Xer motto in life is to stay off the system's radar screen. The last thing I want to do is to actually have a big visibility and taking responsibility for leading it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Neil. I have no idea what you're talking about. From a guy who runs a podcast called the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Exactly. I wonder where I got that idea. Right, exactly.
I would be Gen X, yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Gen Xers were amazingly, other than Barack Obama, who was very much at the early, and many people wouldn't define him as a Gen Xer. He was born in 1961. But other than him, the first Xer candidates even to run for the presidency in the primary was not until 2016. It's unbelievably late in a generation, right? To even running for the presidency. They've been very slow to become state governors, senators, legislatures. And as a result, national government is still run by boomers. Gen Xers are just deciding, no, we want to do, tech startups. We want to get on the marketplace. We want to listen to you and do other things with our life, right? But the whole idea of being responsible for our civic life, for, the entire community, not terribly appealing to Gen X. Much
Yeah.
more appealing, by the way, to millennials. And of course, we will see that appear in time.
Yeah. Neil, what's your next book about?
It's going to be really about this process, but we're going to, the last book, everything were forecasted. I mean, it was way in the future. We kind of said that there was going to be a crisis starting sometime in the first decade of the 21st century. I think we kind of had that with 2008. And we kind of, made long-term forecast of what the era was like. I think now that we're in it, I'm basically expanding my view about where we've been, my further thoughts about the historical process, as well as a much more concrete view of where we are and what's possible in the next climactic decade. Because typically what happens in these crisis eras is things speed up as you move toward the end, right? We've seen that repeatedly. So that's what we're going to see. And that's
do you have a title and do you have a date that it might come out?
I don't have a title yet, but we have titles, but we haven't finalized one yet.
Sure.
And the date will be probably at the end of 2022. So I know that we have a number of readers who want it. So I sort of keeping them informed occasionally about that. But
Okay.
It's got a great publisher, and it's good. It's going to be a fair, and everyone I guess will hear about it. So
I can't wait, and I'm sure my audience is in the same boat.